In this independent learning video, we're going to see how to start using mixed media techniques. The first one is using blending pens, like Kopic style markers. Because the pens will seep through the paper, remember to put some scrap paper underneath before you start to use them. And don't spend a fortune on the Kopic ones if you're new to this. You can get cheap ones from places like Aldi and Lidl and start to experiment with those. Here you can see where it goes through the page. The pens have got two different ends. One's a chisel end, which is a longer, flatter shape, and the other one is what's known as a bullet tip, which is thinner for more detailed precision. We start by putting down a base colour. Usually this is the lighter one, a yellow, or in this case it's a purple. And those wedge ends are bigger for the larger areas, so use that to your advantage. Don't try and do something fiddly with a big nib, otherwise it'll just end up looking messy. We can work back into these base colours with finer bullet nibs and maybe darker shades, and we can try and create those blending techniques. Now we've got to plan a contrasting colour, a base colour. Something nice and light like a yellow is always really good. It allows you to then take your colour temperature either warm or cool, as yellow is quite a good blender for both of those different colour combinations. I'm colouring over all of the details in the areas that I want. Because I've used biro or Sharpie marker, it means that the colour stays in place and it doesn't run. This allows me to make that base detail quite quickly, and I can work back into it later. I've got to decide as I work whether I want to go warm or cool when I work into this, and I think in this case I'm deciding I'm going to go with the warm range, perhaps bring in some oranges and reds just to try and create that warmth that's going to contrast to the purples. Here I'm choosing to go over those textural mark making areas that I built in with the biro, just with the orange. So it's just enhancing that contrast, and it's just creating an addition to the effect, but also in a coloured sense, not just a textural sense. I work my way round with this effect, and then I have to decide how I'm going to move forward. I decide to use the bullet end of the pen to create a pointillist type effect. Pointillism is created using a series of coloured dots. Different colours actually mix together when we look at them. The eye mixes them together. But again, the mark density creates a different type of texture and tone. So how close together we have them or how far apart we have them makes a difference to that overall colour. We can start to bring in a range of different colours, working over and layering as we go along. We constantly review and modify what we're doing. We're making all those creative judgments as we work and as we look and compare it to the shape next to it or to the worksheets of Hundertwasser to see if we're taking our influence from him. If you've not heard of pointillism before, you might want to Google it. It's quite a nice technique, and there's some lovely artists like George Seurat that work in that style. When we layer up the different coloured dots, it makes sense for it to be quite close in terms of harmonious colours. And again, here you can see I'm bringing that same sort of pink colour into the purple to give it a certain richness and tie it together a little bit with the spiral effect that I'm working on. I always refer to Hundertwasser's work and think about the techniques that he's used, the sorts of colours he would blend together, and where he uses that darker coloured edge gradually getting lighter. I try and blend the markers to give these effects and to give a certain richness to the colour that I'm applying in the same way as he would. I can even start to refine and add little bits of details, maybe experiment with the thickness of lines that I'm using, or add little bits of mark making, shapes, details or patterns just to give a little bit more interest and depth to the surface and the work that we're continuing to develop. You can work back into the design with other colours to create more of a blended effect, more of a subtle ombre colour change. This shows the work that we've been doing closer. This time-lapse video shows how I'm building up the colours, creating contrast and moving across different areas of the design to create more of a colour balance. Hundertwasser creates continuity of colour by having the same colours cropping up in certain areas and flowing across the contour lines. Again, remember these pens go through the paper. You can see here I've used directional marks and different colours from the cool colour range to build up the details on the trees. I'm going back in, I'm blending, I'm reviewing, and I'm constantly changing the colours to get them to the blended effects that I want. To create a contrast to that, I've used yellow and orange as a base colour, and I'm starting to use the wedge end of the pen to bring in some mark making and to blend some of the reds into the edges to make it darker. Have fun experimenting. Next time it's watercolours.